Let's break it down straight from the hill to your hometown. No spin, no hype, just facts we find. AI's on the case, no truth left behind. Laws are written, deals are made. Who's got your back, who's throwing shade? We cut through the noise, decode the text, keeping it real. Congress in context, Congress in context, shining the light, breaking it down so you know what's right. Policies, votes, who's working for you? We bring the facts, the power is you.
Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be diving in.
Get ready, because we're pulling back the curtain on a specific day in the engine room of American democracy, diving deep into the Congressional Record from May 22, 2025.
Yep.
Think of this as your fast track to understanding what was really happening on Capitol Hill that day. Welcome to Congress in Context.
Our mission here really is to unpack the key discussions, the debates, the votes, legislative actions, everything captured in this record.
It's a lot of material.
It is. It's a significant volume of information, but we're going to cut through it with you, find those essential insights, those notable moments that truly matter from this particular day.
And as you'll see, the sheer variety of topics covered in just one day, it's pretty incredible.
It really ranges.
Yeah, from these major national policy debates impacting millions, right down to, deeply personal community tributes.
We'll explore some truly heated exchanges, particularly around proposed cuts to healthcare and some changes to environmental rules. We'll look at important votes that were cast, proposed legislation touching on everything from, well, the future of stablecoins to preparing for wildfire season.
Wow.
Plus some, poignant tributes and recognitions that offer a different kind of insight into the legislative process itself.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Let's unpack the major legislative battles and procedural showdowns that dominated the conversation. We saw some very strong criticism voiced in the Senate regarding a bill that had recently passed the House.
That's right. The record detailed significant arguments criticizing specific provisions within that House bill. One major point of contention was described as representing the largest cut to Medicaid in American history.
The largest ever.
According to the source, yes. And these cuts were apparently being rushed forward to take effect as early as next year.
And the stated potential impact, as described in the debate. It sounds pretty stark.
It was. Arguments were made that it could lead to hospitals, particularly rural ones, closing their doors, jobs being lost, and ultimately, the source claimed up to 14 million Americans potentially losing their health insurance coverage.
14 million.
Yeah. And community health centers, urgent care clinics, they were also mentioned as facing potential shutdowns.
And what was highlighted was the contrast, right?
Yeah.
That these massive cuts were in the same bill that repealed taxes on panning beds.
That contrast was explicitly drawn in the record, yes.
Okay.
The record also highlights a new provision reportedly added late in the process. It was characterized as increasing anti-choice measures.
How so?
It was stated that this provision would penalize enrollees in the Affordable Care Act exchanges for choosing plans that cover reproductive care.
Penalize them.
That's how it was described. And the argument presented was that this could impact nearly 1 in 7 Americans who've been insured through the ACA since 2014.
So a significant portion of ACA enrollees.
That was the claim. And the criticism didn't stop there. It extended to proposed cuts to SNAP, the Food Assistance Program.
Right.
Those were also reportedly being moved up to next year.
And the concern there.
The stated concern was that this acceleration would make it significantly harder for food pantries, other charitable organizations, to adapt their services.
Making it harder for them to cope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Potentially leading to increased hunger and closures among these critical support systems. That was the fear expressed.
What was also notable, reading the record, were the very direct political attributions tied to this bill.
Oh, absolutely. One speaker explicitly attributed the bill and the pain they argued it would cause to the hard right over there, describing them as cheering while, quote, bond markets were spiraling and working families were worrying.
Strong language.
Very. And the same speaker directly linked rising electric bills to specific political figures and groups in the House and Senate.
So amidst all that debate, we also saw a counterproposal, right? A bill introduced in the Senate?
Yes, the Protect Medicare and Medicaid Act of 2025. This bill aims to exempt Medicare and Medicaid specifically from the budget reconciliation process.
Okay, maybe quickly explain budget reconciliation for folks.
Sure. It's a special procedure. It allows certain spending, tax, and debt limit bills to pass the Senate with just a simple majority.
So bypassing the usual 60-vote requirement.
Exactly. It bypasses the filibuster, essentially, for those specific types of bills.
And the argument for exempting Medicare and Medicaid.
As presented in the record, it's that these programs are just fundamental safety nets. They cover over 100 million Americans.
Wow.
And the fear expressed was that millions could lose insurance or face bankruptcy if these programs were vulnerable to cuts through this fast-track reconciliation process.
Okay, moving to another really contentious area within that same criticized House bill, provisions focused on clean energy. How were those characterized?
They were framed very dramatically, described as creating an American energy kill switch.
An American energy kill switch. That sounds really significant. What were the potential outcomes highlighted by those opposing it?
The source detailed arguments suggesting these provisions could effectively cripple much of the clean energy industry.
Cripple it.
That was the word used. The stated consequences included hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, of jobs being lost. Specifically citing manufacturing jobs going to China, solar and wind jobs just vanishing.
And the longer-term concern.
The concern raised was that, as a result, China could end up having significant influence over U.S. energy markets within a decade.
So for some in the Senate, particularly Democrats mentioned in the record, the stated plan is to fight this every step of the way.
That was the stated intention, yes.
It really underscores how these policy debates over things like energy can have such wide-ranging stated impacts, doesn't it? From individual jobs right up to national security concerns, like competition with China.
Definitely. And speaking of showdowns, one of the most significant procedural ones documented in this record revolved around joint resolutions HJ-Res 88 and HJ-Res 89.
Okay, what were those about?
These aim to disapprove specific EPA rules related to California's vehicle and engine pollution control standards.
Yeah, the California standards issue.
Exactly. And both resolutions ultimately passed the Senate on this day.
Okay, let's get into the core of this debate. What was the main argument presented for using the Congressional Review Act, the CRA, to disapprove these California rules?
Well, the argument made was that this action was necessary to prevent one state, California, from effectively setting emission policies for the whole country.
Because other states tend to follow California's lead.
Precisely. It was noted that California's standards, which are allowed via a waiver process under the Clean Air Act, were indeed influencing other states. So proponents framed this disapproval as Congress reclaiming its legislative authority under the CRA.
Protecting consumers, too, they argued.
Yes, protecting consumers from potentially higher costs and supporting free markets over state mandates. That was the justification offered.
But the arguments against this action, they seemed incredibly detailed and strong in the record.
They were very strong.
How was this specific use of the CRA characterized by opponents?
It was described as much more than just disagreeing with the rule. It was called a fundamental power play.
A power play.
Yes, proponents argued it fundamentally changed Senate procedure itself. Critics contended that it effectively overrode the Senate parliamentarians' determination.
The parliamentarians' view being
that a Clean Air Act waiver isn't the kind of rule subject to disapproval under the CRA. So this action was labeled a dangerous new nuclear option.
A nuclear option?
Wow. Specifically called an oil exception to the filibuster rule because it targeted environmental regulations and, critics argued, bypassed the standard legislative process.
And there was a lot of historical context brought into this discussion too, right? About California's role.
Yes, that history was central to the counter-argument. California's unique authority goes way back to 1966, even before the Clean Air Act, because of its specific air quality challenges.
Right.
It established the first tailpipe standard, CARB, in 1967, based on scientific data. California was frequently called an innovator and trailblazer.
Driving national innovation.
That was the argument. In areas like EVs, fuel efficiency, many other states chose to follow its lead, and the point was made that California's waiver requests hadn't been revoked in 50 years because they were seen as competent and led to national progress.
So the opposition saw this disapproval action as directly targeting that long-standing and often beneficial California leadership.
Exactly. It was explicitly framed as serving the interests of the fossil fuel industry, who, according to the critics, see California's clean vehicle rules as, quote, existential threats.
And the language used to describe this action internally within the legislative process was very sharp.
Extremely sharp. It was called an end run around the policymaking process.
And that run.
And a massive deception. Critics argued it avoided the regular legislative order, where the CRA or the Clean Air Act itself could have been amended through standard debate and votes. Instead, they argued, this action bypassed negotiation, fair procedures, allowing the majority to, quote, ram through its view arbitrarily and capriciously, unbounded by typical legal or rational basis requirements.
There was even stronger language used, wasn't there?
There was. One speaker went as far as to explicitly characterize it as being so dedicated to pulling the strings of government on behalf of the fossil fuel industry. That is corruption, plain and simple.
Wow. That's direct.
Very direct. The debate also got quite technical. There was this detailed explanation of the distinction between a rule and an order or waiver under the CRA.
And the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, came up.
Yes, reference as reportedly stating that agencies typically determine what constitutes a rule, and that determination is conclusive. The discussion mentioned California's 2022 request for stronger rules.
Right.
The Biden administration working with GAO to frame it as an order, but then, as stated, sitting on it, while 11 other states went ahead and followed California's standards anyway.
So the stated negative outcomes of this disapproval action, they weren't just procedurals, were they?
Not at all. Arguments were made that outside the chamber, this would lead to dirtier air, worse health outcomes, linked explicitly in the source to increased instances of cancer.
Really? Cancer?
That was stated. It was also argued it would put the U.S. auto industry in a worse competitive position globally, especially against China, described as being ahead in EV development.
And the broader impact.
According to critics, this action allowed a minority of the country, based on the states represented by the votes for disapproval, to overrule policies preferred by areas representing the majority of the nation's economy.
And the stated risks weren't just about immediate policy outcomes, but also about setting a precedent within Congress itself.
Yes, that was a major concern voiced by critics, that this action opened an entirely new avenue for mischief.
How so?
By twisting the CRA, the worry was it could be used in the future to attack any agency action or even scientific findings that a majority disliked, potentially extending to other polluting industries or efforts to strip protections for workers, privacy, or even reproductive freedom.
It's fascinating how speakers drew historical parallels here, comparing this era to the Roaring '20s.
Yes, but perhaps darkly. Not the jazz and liberation 20s, but one described in the source as marked by fossil fuels, dirty air, obstructionism, isolationism.
Contrasting it with innovation.
Right. And current trade actions, like tariffs and retaliation threats, were specifically linked to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act.
Which is widely blamed for worsening the Great Depression.
Exactly. So the action on California's waiver was framed as choosing to be stuck in the past, favoring older technology, a dirtier environment, rather than leading the future in renewables and competing effectively with China.
A really charged debate.
Absolutely. Another complex legal concept discussed in the record was this issue of nationwide injunctions.
Described as a fairly recent thing.
In the scope of American legal history, yes.
Okay, let's quickly revisit the basic civics lesson the source laid out.
Right. Quick review. 3 branches. Legislative rights laws, executive executes them, judicial interprets them.
And the courts.
Judicial structure. Supreme Court at the top, circuit courts of appeals, then district courts, the trial courts. Traditionally, district courts were understood to rule just on the specific case in front of them, within their geographic district.
But nationwide injunctions changed that scope.
Precisely. The practice, reportedly picking up steam after the 1960s, involves a single district judge issuing a ruling that applies across the entire country.
Halting a government action everywhere.
Exactly. Not just in that specific case or location.
And criticisms of this practice were voiced in the record.
Yes. The source noted that under President Biden, there had reportedly been 14 nationwide injunctions issued. President Biden's own Solicitor General was quoted, warning that these injunctions halt legal government actions.
And this issue was framed not necessarily as partisan, but constitutional.
That was the argument presented, yes. Fundamentally about the proper balance of power, the role of lower courts versus the Supreme Court.
So instead of the Supreme Court being the ultimate check on the executive.
The argument was that these nationwide injunctions became a kind of backdoor way for judges to actually write legislation and to bring the decision of the executive branch to a halt, asserting power over the whole country from one district court.
Okay, shifting gears a bit from those major battles, the record also documents a variety of other policy proposals and national priorities being addressed.
That's right, a whole range of things.
One area getting attention is digital assets and financial innovation. The point was made that our current payment systems are, well, pretty outdated, right?
Yeah, largely built in the 70s and 80s. And this can create competitive disadvantages for U.S. businesses, delays, fees, especially for international payments.
That's where digital assets like stablecoins came into the discussion.
Exactly. As a potential solution. The argument is they can complete transactions much faster, like seconds faster and cheaper.
The Genius Act was mentioned here, presented as a bill to modernize things.
Right. It aims to sort of revolutionize how businesses can use these new technologies while also preserving the stability of our existing financial institutions, specifically the dual banking system, state and federal chartered banks.
And Wyoming's experience was highlighted as a model.
Yes, described as a laboratory of democracy. How it provided legal clarity for digital assets, integrated them into banking, serving local needs. The Genius Act is said to support this by creating clear pathways for stablecoin issuance under both state and federal oversight, building on Wyoming's framework, which proponents argue offers strong consumer protection and encourages responsible innovation.
We also saw several proposed amendments related to stablecoin regulation itself. One seemed quite notable.
Which one was that?
The one proposing to prohibit certain senior government officials, president, VP, Congress members, high-level appointees from owning or being affiliated with stablecoin or crypto issuers.
Ah, yes, that amendment. It included provisions for transitioning away from such holdings, potential enforcement like prison time and fines, and new disclosure requirements. It was quite comprehensive.
Other amendments mentioned.
Proposals related to establishing U.S. jurisdiction for enforcing financial crimes, like anti-money laundering and sanctions against these entities, and also proposals regarding prohibiting a central bank digital currency and preventing restrictions on using self-custodial digital asset software.
Interesting. Another distinct proposal found in the record was about auditing the Federal Reserve.
Yes, a recurring theme. This proposal requires the Comptroller General head of the GAO to complete a full audit of the Fed Board of Governors and all Fed banks within a year of the bill becoming law.
And a report to Congress?
Mandates a report shortly after, and reportedly includes language that would repeal certain existing limitations on the GAO's ability to audit some aspects of the Fed's operations.
Okay. Moving into national security, foreign policy, technology.
Yeah.
There were proposed requirements linked to reporting on foreign entities.
Right. Annual reporting requirements for 7 years, specifically on foreign persons listed on the non-SDN Chinese Military Industrial Complex Companies list, the NSCMIC list.
And what would that report cover?
Detailing enforcement actions taken against them and requiring an assessment of whether the definition of prohibited technology in this context needs updating.
How did the source define prohibited technology or notifiable technology here?
It gave specific examples, things like advanced integrated circuits, AI models trained with very high computing power, quantum computing applications like those for breaking encryption, or secure communications and components for hypersonic systems.
So cutting-edge sensitive tech.
Exactly. The record also notes the president could potentially waive these reporting requirements for certain entities, case by case, for national security or foreign policy reasons, but Congress would have to be notified and briefed.
And there was a broader strategy proposed.
Yes, a proposed requirement for developing a strategy for working multinationally with allies and partners to prevent countries of concern from developing or acquiring these specific prohibited technologies.
Okay. And in foreign policy specifically, a resolution about the mayor of Istanbul.
Yes, Stresser's 257. Expressing the sense of the Senate regarding the arrest and continued detention of Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, Turkey.
What facts did the resolution lay out?
His election and re-election as mayor, noting he's widely seen as a likely opposition candidate for president. It detailed his detention in March 2025, his formal arrest and charging corruption, terrorism, etc., and subsequent charges.
Did it mention outside reports or reactions?
It did. It referenced previous reports by the Council of Europe citing restrictions on political competition and freedoms in Turkey, allegations of government corruption since 2013. It highlighted that 2 months had passed since his detention, noted calls for his release from the European Commission President and Council of Europe, and mentioned Turkish authorities blocking his social media.
So the resolution's core call.
For Turkish authorities to either present credible evidence to support the charges or immediately release him.
Got it. We also saw mention of a bill, S. 1867, proposing to phase out de minimis treatment under the Tariff Act of 1930.
Right. And just quickly, de minimis is that rule allowing shipments below a certain value threshold to enter the country duty-free, often with less inspection.
So phasing that out
Yeah.
connects back to those earlier discussions about trade and tariffs.
In a way, yes. It touches on international economic positioning and how goods flow across borders.
Okay. Shifting from international matters and finance to public health and social well-being, the record included notes on several relevant bills and resolutions there, too.
Yes, definitely. Proposals related to public health infrastructure, like bills to reauthorize nursing workforce development programs.
Important for staffing.
Absolutely. And another to establish national quality standards for continuous skilled nursing services under Medicaid.
We also saw several resolutions designating awareness months and weeks. Seems like a common practice.
It is, reflecting national priorities. May 2025 was recognized as Mental Health Awareness Month, and the first full week, May 4th, 10th, as Children's Mental Health Awareness Week.
And the Children's Mental Health Resolution had specific points.
It did. Noted the increased vulnerability of young people, anxiety, depression, bullying, self-harm, highlighted the ongoing stigma that prevents people seeking help, and the significant harm untreated conditions can cause a child's development.
May was also designated Older Americans Month.
Yes, a recognition dating back to 1963. The resolution touched on its history, current demographics, goals like promoting participation, independence, safety, well-being, and acknowledging contributions of older generations. May was also recognized as American Stroke Month.
And a resolution on National Foster Care Month was agreed to. That seemed quite detailed.
It was, highlighting the situation of children in the system. The record included statistics around 368,000 children in care, over 186,000 entering in 2022, over 108,000 awaiting adoption.
And reasons for entering care.
Parental drug abuse was cited as significant, accounting for over 61,000 entries in 2022. It was also noted that children of color tend to spend longer in the system.
The role of foster parents was highlighted, too.
Yes, described as frontline caregivers, providing not just physical care, but emotional support, advocacy for education. And there was discussion about the contrast in support for relative versus non-relative caregivers.
Suggesting placing kids with relatives is often better.
The source indicated it often leads to more stability and better outcomes, though these relative caregivers sometimes receive less financial assistance. That was a point raised.
And the challenges for kids aging out.
Also detailed, higher risks of homelessness, lack of health insurance, difficulties with education, employment. The average time in care was noted 22.6 months, and about a third experienced multiple placements, which is really disruptive.
Mentioned historical legislation, too.
Yes, aimed at improving outcomes, including the more recent Family First Prevention Services Act and others going back decades.
The mental health discussion also connected to veterans, right?
It did, noting veterans are more likely to experience mental health challenges than civilians, and highlighting the stated need for more funding and resources for them.
Related bills mentioned.
Expanding veteran access to certain hospitals and the community care program, and modifying public service loan forgiveness for certain military members and NOAA personnel.
Okay. Turning our attention now to environmental and resource management. A resolution designating May 2025 as National Wildfire Preparedness Month was introduced.
Yes, and the statistics presented about wildfires were quite concerning.
How so?
Highlighting the increasing scale, complexity, severity across the country, lengthening seasons, threats in new regions previously low risk.
Numbers.
Quoted average acres burned over the past 10 years, and specifically Jan-May 2025, showing a noticeable increase this year. Predictions for summer 2025 indicated over 60% of states face some risk, over 50% face above normal risk.
And causes.
Pointed out that about 85% are human-caused, emphasizing the role of public behavior.
And the cost.
Significant. Federal suppression alone, over $2.5 billion annually. Estimated total damaged property, business, health, tens or even hundreds of billions per year.
So the resolution stressed proactive measures.
Absolutely. Planning, mitigation, risk reduction at all levels. Specific practices mentioned include creating defensible space, community planning, evacuation plans, vegetation management, limiting combustibles during high-risk periods. The designation aims to boost public awareness of these practices.
Alongside that, a resolution on the global biodiversity crisis.
Yes, also introduced. Described as unprecedented, human-driven, fundamentally altering environments worldwide, 75% terrestrial, 66% marine impacted.
Driven by.
Overexploitation of species, accelerating climate change, pollution, invasive species. Those were the key drivers mentioned.
The statistics on biodiversity loss sounded sobering.
They are approximately 1 million species facing imminent or near extinction. Specific percentages for vulnerable groups: over 40% amphibians, around a third of corals, sharks, marine mammals, over 60% cycads, over 30% conifers, about 10% insects.
And population declines.
Also stark. Vertebrate populations down an average of 68% globally. Loss of 3 billion birds in North America since 1970. 50% of live coral lost globally.
And the impact goes beyond just the species themselves.
Right. Discussed impacts on economic and cultural services, reduced land productivity, massive resource use for agriculture, risks to food crops from pollinator loss, overfished fisheries, greenhouse gas emissions from land use changes.
And impacts on specific communities.
Highlighted that indigenous and nature-reliant communities, including Native Americans and Alaska Natives, are disproportionately impacted but also offer valuable traditional ecological knowledge that should be integrated into solutions.
So the resolution called for a national strategy.
Yes, to reverse the decline. Mention goals like conserving 30% of U.S. land and water by 2030, the 30 by 30 goal. Emphasize incorporating indigenous knowledge, ensuring equitable access to nature, and integrating biodiversity into national security and foreign policy.
Beyond these really significant policy discussions, the record also noted introductions of various other bills covering a whole range of different areas.
That's right. Just gives you a sense of the sheer breadth.
Briefly touching on some of these, they included bills addressing orphan drugs for rare diseases under price negotiation mechanisms, proposals on vote by mail and automatic voter registration, a bill protecting genetic information in bankruptcy,
Interesting.
legislation for a domestic cotton consumption credit, a bill aiming to transfer the U.S. Marshal Service to the judicial branch,
Okay.
and even a bill proposing to rescind Medals of Honor awarded for actions at Wounded Knee Creek back in 1890. Really shows the scope of issues crossing congressional desks.
Absolutely. Moving away from pure policy debates for a moment, the Congressional Record also captures these moments of tribute, recognition, focus on specific communities and individuals. It offers a different perspective on the work.
A deeply poignant moment documented was the tribute remembering Sarah Lynn Milgram and Yaron Lishkinsky.
Yes. Tragically murdered at the Capitol Jewish Museum. Described as Israeli embassy workers, a young couple dedicated to public service and peace.
The event itself characterized as
A sickening, violent, and anti-Semitic attack in the tribute.
and this led to broader discussion.
It did. Around the troubling increase in anti-Semitic hate, speakers called for confronting it directly, urging people not to be afraid or silent, send a clear message that Jewish people belong in America, their lives have value.
A related resolution was mentioned.
Yes, a bipartisan resolution recognizing May as Jewish American Heritage Month, mentioned in this context, underscoring a moment of unity amidst tragedy.
The record also included a tribute to Greensboro police officer Michael T. Horan.
Right. His extensive service noted Coast Guard Reserves, Greensboro PD, served on various teams, instructor, mentor, known for taking newer officers under his wing.
There was a specific story about him.
Yes, recounted him receiving a life-saving award for rescuing a father and son from rip currents while he was off duty on vacation. A real testament to his character.
And tragically,
The tribute detailed his death, December 23, 2024, killed in the line of duty responding to a call. Suspect reportedly pulled a weapon without warning. His devotion to family, community, public safety was profoundly highlighted. The service and 21 gun salute mentioned.
there was also a tribute remembering Mayor Karen Alexander of Salisbury, North Carolina.
Yes, passed away at 73, late December 2024. Widely described as a servant leader, loving, caring, and kind. Known for putting others first, living by strong principles, a quote from Sweaty Timothy was shared.
Remembered for her relationships.
The tribute noted she was genuinely invested in others' success. Her family remembered her as incredibly nurturing, supportive. A quote from her daughter-in-law was shared. Her legacy connected to the NC motto, Esta quam videre, to be rather than to seem.
Actions speaking louder than words.
Exactly.
And we saw a tribute honoring World War II veteran Orville von Evigen.
Yes, receiving an honorary high school diploma at 93, recognizing his sacrifice and service. His simple but powerful advice to the graduating class was included. Be kind and work hard.
Love that. Beyond individuals, communities, and businesses were also celebrated.
Yes. The Rowan County Chamber of Commerce in North Carolina honored on its 100th anniversary, recognizing its vital role in growth, large membership, employees represented, highlighted the area's history of entrepreneurship, birthplace of Cheerwine, Food Lion.
And in Idaho, this Support Local Gems initiative.
Right. Recognizing several small businesses for June 2025 included Bond and Bevel in Caldwell, a coffee shop community hub, Cloverleaf Creamery in Twin Falls, a family dairy selling direct and via a farm market, HawkTech Arms, a firearms retailer supporting shooting sports, serving military lay active volunteers.
Others mentioned.
Thor's Chocolate in Idaho Falls, launched 2023, already a staple, partners with local charities. These recognitions framed as shining a light on diverse local businesses contributing to communities.
The record also noted the 300th anniversary of the Reformed Church in the United States, RCUS.
Founded Pennsylvania 1725, planning their tricentennial celebration June 2025 at Mount Rushmore, their historical role in shaping intellectual and spiritual life acknowledged.
An important bill agreed to was S. 10051, designating the Historic Greenwood District Black Wall Street National Monument.
Yes, a significant designation. Recognizes the area, serves as remembrance of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, described as a painful stain on history, a moment to learn from, something previously pushed under the rug.
The discussion around this bill emphasized careful drafting.
Very much so. To protect existing private property rights, ensure no federal takeover or eminent domain, while still providing deserved federal recognition. Highlighted as holding great meaning for North Tulsa residents, described as actively turning tragedy into triumph.
So important. The Congressional Record also, of course, documents the daily procedural actions.
The nuts and bolts, yeah. This record noted motions to proceed, unanimous consent agreements, roll call votes being taken.
Specific roll call votes.
Recorded on HJRes 88 and 89, those joint resolutions on the California Emissions Standards waiver disapproval we discussed earlier.
Nomination considerations, too.
Part of the day's business. Mentions of individuals nominated for key roles: Assistant Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary of State, Assistant Secretary of Labor for Veterans Employment Training, Deputy Director of OMB. Noted Senator Gallego specifically stated he'd have voted nay on the OMB nomination if present.
Committee hearings mentioned.
Yep. Focused on budget requests for labor, FDA, National Guard reserves. Banking Committee also held a hearing on Defense Production Act authorities.
And finally, on a slightly lighter note, Seersucker Day.
Yes, a resolution designating June 12, 2025 as National Seersucker Day, every Thursday after through August as Seersucker Thursday, and June 2025 as Seersucker Appreciation Month. Recognizing the fabric's history, cultural significance, calling it the working person's uniform.
You learn something new every day reading the record.
You really do.
So, as we bring this deep dive into the Congressional Record from May 22, 2025 to a close, it really is remarkable, isn't it? Reflecting on the sheer range of topics we've explored in just one day documented on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely. We've seen everything from these high-stakes policy debates with potentially massive impacts, healthcare, environment, economy, right down to deeply personal tributes for lives lost and celebrations of community history, small businesses, the backbone of local economies.
It really underscores the idea that the Congressional Record, while it seems like just dry text sometimes, it's a direct window into the issues and values being debated and acted upon in Washington. Discussions that ultimately affect your life, your community, across the entire country.
And as the source material itself emphasized, understanding these discussions, even the often complex procedural maneuvering, it's crucial to understanding how policy is made and challenged in this country.
There were even calls within the record for citizens to stay informed.
Explicit calls, yes. To stay engaged, suggestions to contact representatives on specific issues like rising energy bills or efforts to protect healthcare programs.
So let's leave you with a thought to mull over, one that comes directly from the sources we spent this time with. Consider the striking contrast we saw in this single day's record.
Yeah. These moments of deeply polarized, sometimes even acrimonious debate over major policy shifts, described with harsh terms like corruption, power play, placed right alongside moments of evident bipartisan agreement and unity.
Right, like recognizing heritage months, honoring individuals, celebrating local communities.
Exactly. What does that contrast tell you about the nature of representation and governance today? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about.
We hope this deep dive has been a valuable shortcut to being well-informed about a busy day in Congress. We encourage you to keep exploring and engaging with the legislative process. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.